Hey, good morning, YouTube. It's time to get the harmonizer out and give my BMW R90 another carb balancing or a carb synchronization, I should say. I have a video out where I explain how to use the harmonizer, but it is not quite as clear as I wish it would be. Some people have had some questions. I even had an airhead call me and I talked him through the harmonizer balancing process. But now we're going to do that once again, and I hope I can get this a little clearer what the steps are. There are more or less 3 steps to the process. And since we just did a top-end reseal with a little bit of a rebuild, I have lapped valves, I have fresh piston rings in my engine. I'm assuming that the compression is a little better than it was before, and that of course all has a effect on how your carburetors work with your engine, and vacuum levels are a little different. And so I want to rebalance, resynchronize my carburetors to make the bike run as good as it can. So we're gonna dive right into it. I'm gonna get you really close with the camera today to see all the screws that I'm moving and what the harmonizer does and what I use it for. Okay, let's get started. All right, so let's talk about a few things, a couple definitions, a couple of words that I'm going to be using to explain beforehand, so that I don't have to do that while I'm synchronizing my bike. So the R90, made in '74, has a constant velocity carburetor made by Bing. Here's the number, it's a 643212. And this particular one here already has vacuum ports on it, and they are blocked off with a little screw. So this is the vacuum port. Then at the bottom of the carburetor you have 2 adjustment screws. One is the idle mixture and the other one is actually knurled. See that there? So you can potentially use it while you're on the side of the road just with your fingers to adjust the idle speed. So idle speed, idle mixture. These 2 we're going to be working on. And to be able to use the harmonizer, your carburetor has to have vacuum ports. On some of those Bing models, older models that came before this one, you can retrofit these vacuum ports. I think Bing, there is a parts web page, they actually sell the retrofit kit. If I can find it, I will put a link down into the description. So vacuum port, idle mixture, idle speed, and your throttle cable adjuster is another thing that we're going to be working on. It's already kind of a million degrees out here. It's 9 o'clock in the morning and I'm already burning up, but hey, all for you guys. When you do something like this and you're going to have the motorcycle running stationary, since it's air cooled and there's not much airflow when it's standing still, right? You got to have some fans. You got to create some airflow or you will overheat your engine. And outside is a good start. You don't want to die from carbon monoxide poisoning in your garage. Set up some fans. I have 2. Point them right at your cylinder head and crank them up to top speed, and then you should be fine. And then also, when you want to do any kind of carburetor adjustments, you got to make sure your bike is warmed up. So take it for a 20-minute ride, come back, park it, turn it off, set this stuff up, and then you get going with the harmonizer. Harmonizer vacuum multi-tool is a carburetor balancer that is not exclusively made for airheads, but it works for it really well. And the company that makes this, they are the makers of the Cat Dash. It's KLC Design LLC. I will put a link down below. They are not a channel sponsor, even though they should be. right? So they make the cat dash for a lot of the airhead models, which replace the circuitry inside your little dash and replaces all the incandescent light bulbs with LED. They came out with a harmonizer. If I completely understand the situation, the inventor of the harmonizer has since passed away, but the company still makes them or sells them, or have stopped already selling them, even though it's a really grandiose product. I guess once the inventor is gone and is not available for future improvements, then a product eventually, yeah, comes to a grinding halt. But this thing is amazing, has a few extra functions which I will show you. Here's the box. There is actually online some pretty nice write-up available. Airhead tuning with Grog harmonizer. Grog was the nickname of the guy who invented it. This is very useful. If you really spend time and read through it, you can figure out how to do that yourself, but I will now take you along. It has 2 vacuum hoses. As I said, it's not exclusively made for airheads. You can even harmonize or balance a 4-cylinder Suzuki if you want to. If it's a carbureted Suzuki, usually 4-cylinder motorcycles, you always harmonize or balance 2 carbs to each other, then you balance the other 2 to each other, and then you have a linkage between 2 pairs of carburetors that then balance those two sets of 2 carburetors to each other. But hey, that goes too far. I only have a 2-cylinder motorcycle with 2 carburetors, and we're gonna work on this for now. So harmonizer comes out of the box. I have this old RAM mount thing here that I used to use for my cell phone. Now I'm using the quad lock, but this is perfect to hold the harmonizer in place like that. But let's get started what we need to do. So like I said, I need to warm up my bike, and then once it's warmed up, we're gonna have it idle here, and then we're gonna start with what's called the gauge mode. So when you first turn the harmonizer on, it greets you with harmonizer multi-tool, and it's calibrating. While it's calibrating, you don't want this thing to be hooked up to any vacuum port. So it needs to be calibrated to atmosphere. At the moment, what we're looking at is the balancer mode. Balancer mode means it gets 2 vacuum signals, one from the left cylinder and one from the right cylinder, and it tells you the vacuum difference between those 2 carburetors. And then you need to do adjustments, which I will explain, to get this bar in the middle. There's a bar right now perfectly in the middle. You see this little smiley face. The smiley face tells you if the harmonizer is happy with the result. It also gives you a readout in millibars or hectopascal, or millibars is the same, what the difference is. And you can get this really close depending on what state your bike is in, and also what state your carburetors are in. If you do this right after you rebuild your carburetor, you put all new seals and gaskets and diaphragms in there, then this shouldn't be a problem. But for any bike that you do a carb balancing on, it requires that your valves are set correctly under there, your valve flash is set correctly, and your timing is set correctly. Both of those things are already done on my bike. The timing is dead nuts on. I'm actually running a crankshaft driven electronic ignition made by Silent Hectic, and I don't even have this shadowing of the timing mark anymore, because you know the crank driven ignition system takes the slop of the timing chain completely out of the equation, and it's a dead nuts set timing. Perfect. I just did a fresh valve adjustment after the first ride here. after our rebuild. So timing and valves are set perfectly, and that's a requirement before you start messing with your carbs. People always try to get their carbs synchronized properly when everything else is still a mess on their bike. So timing, valve adjustment, and then you can start playing with your carburetors. So this is, like I said, this is what the balancer mode looks like. It will give you the differential of vacuum between two vacuum ports, and these two vacuum ports will then later get hooked up to our carburetors on the vacuum ports that you have seen. So now let's go down the road here, if I still remember how to use everything. So you can zero it, you can power it off, you have a toggle LED, balancer mode, gauge mode, timed lantern, and a beacon. And info. What's the info? Oh yeah, release version so and so. So if you push the button here and hold it, it toggles through its functions. Now we're in gauge mode. Gauge mode is designed to work with one vacuum signal. So in this stage, in this gauge mode, you will have one vacuum line hooked to only one carburetor. The other carburetor's vacuum port you have to have close with that little screw and the gasket. So you are only working on one carburetor. This is usually what you do at the very beginning. What this does, it measures your vacuum on one carburetor produced, and it's at its current settings in inches of mercury. If I'm not completely mistaken, HG, is that inches of mercury? I think so. So, and in this gauge mode, you're trying to improve the idle mixture. So the idle mixture is adjusted with the idle mixture screw that I showed you earlier, right there. And you are turning this idle mixture screw left or right until you find the highest value of vacuum. So the highest number, you're looking for the highest number. So you play around with this idle mixture screw here. This is a little recessed into the housing of the carburetor until you find the highest vacuum value. Then you plug this vacuum port with a little screw in the gasket. Then you go over to the other side, take this one out, hook the harmonizer to this port, and do exactly the same. So gauge mode used for the idle mixture adjustment only connects to one carburetor. That's it. One vacuum line, one carburetor at a time. You play around with a mixture screw until you get the highest value. Then close up, go over to the other side, do it all over again. Then once you have done that and you have reached the optimized vacuum number with a mixture screw, only the mixture screw, don't touch anything else. Use the mixture screw, find the highest value, leave it alone. Once you're done with that, you push the button, you toggle through, you go to balancer mode. So now the system is in the comparison mode, the differential between two vacuum ports. And now you will have to hook both vacuum lines up, one to the right, one to the left. That's when I usually put my harmonizer into this, into this ram mount. So it's right in front of me. And then we're getting to the part where we actually synchronize the carburetors to each other. The synchronization, you will not touch the mixer screw again. So once you in gauge mode have done the mixture adjustment, you leave the mixture screw alone. So then in this mode you are going to switch to using only the idle speed adjuster right there. I don't know if you can even see that one. Same on the other side. Oh, what's going on? Yeah, the knurled screw. So let's talk about it before the engine noise comes into play in the fans and all that. So let's say this double line here is actually supposed to be a needle. So that's kind of like a needle gauge. If you have a higher vacuum on one side than the other, the needle will move towards the stronger suction. So if this cylinder here, let's say this is left side, this is right side, the left cylinder and the left carburetor has more suction, the needle will move over that way. So to balance this out, to bring the needle over, you can do one of two things. You can either open the throttle, the speed adjuster, the idle speed adjuster, screw it in like righty-tighty, screw it in, which opens the throttle butterfly, and that takes away some of the vacuum. So the more closed this throttle butterfly is, the more vacuum the engine sucks in this carburetor. So if you grab the knob, either with a screwdriver or with your fingers, and you turn it in, you're opening the throttle butterfly, which in turn reduces the vacuum. So if the needle is over to the left side, on the left carburetor, you are turning the idle speed adjuster in. You're opening the throttle butterfly, and that reduces the vacuum, will make the needle go over to the right side or towards the center. That's one thing that you can do. Or if the needle is over to the left, you go to your right side carburetor. Here's the right side carburetor. Needle is still to the left. Needle is on the left of center, and you want this to go over to the right side. The second method that you can do is to increase the vacuum on your right carburetor by turning the idle adjustment screw, idle speed adjuster, out. So you're closing the throttle butterfly. If you close the throttle butterfly on this carburetor, you will increase the vacuum on this side. So when the needle is on the left carburetor has more vacuum. If you now close the throttle butterfly by turning the idle speed adjustment screw out, you're increasing the vacuum in this carburetor, which then will bring the needle over. So you can either open the throttle butterfly on the left side, which will increase the vacuum, will decrease the vacuum and make the needle go over to the right. Or you close the throttle butterfly on this one, increase the vacuum, and that will also make the needle go over to the side. When the engine is actually running and the lines are hooked up, this will also give you an RPM readout, and it doesn't measure that from your ignition. It will actually measure that from vacuum pulses, which is highly accurate. So when you are working on balancing and you see your RPM readout down there, and let's say your bike needs to have around 1,000 RPM. Oh, now it just turned off. It has a battery saver. As you can see, it also has a battery indicator there on the side. So let's wait until it comes alive again. So when your vacuum is off center, you have more vacuum on the left carburetor than on the right, but your RPM is already 1,100 RPM and you want it at 1,000, then opening the throttle butterfly on this carburetor to reduce the vacuum will actually bring the idle RPM up, and you don't want that. You actually want it to go down. So then you would rather go to this carburetor and close the throttle butterfly, which increases the vacuum, but it also reduces the idle RPM. So you kind of have to see this in conjunction. Vacuum is over to one side and your RPM is low. You would turn the idle adjuster in, open the throttle butterfly, you would reduce the vacuum over here and increase your idle RPM. If vacuum is over here and your RPM is already high, you would go to this carburetor, close the throttle butterfly, you would increase the vacuum but reduce the idle RPM. So this is kind of a balancing act, but once you have understood how that works together, it is actually really simple. So now we have talked about the gauge mode, the balancing mode. There is one more step that you have to do. So once you have adjusted idle mixture with the gauge mode, and then you have adjusted the balancing for the idle setting, then you have to go and run your engine at RPM. So I usually go to about, oh, you can't see, it's too much sunlight, 3000 RPM. Try to hold the needle on my gauge, on my tachometer, steady at 3000 for a little while, and see which carburetor, which cylinder really, it's the cylinders producing the vacuum, not the carburetor, but which cylinder has more vacuum at 3000 RPM. So, and then we have the same game to play again. You can either, let's say we're at 3000 RPM and the needle is again on the left side, yeah? More vacuum on the left side. You can change the throttle cable adjuster. You're unscrewing this little adjuster. You're taking the locking nut loose, and then you unscrew this adjuster that literally makes the sleeve of the throttle cable longer. That means when you turn your throttle handle, your grip, it will open the throttle butterfly that's in here, the plate, it will open it further than before. That means that it will reduce the vacuum. So you're at 3000 RPM, you have more vacuum on the left side, that's why the needle is over here. You take the little locking nut loose, you turn, you unscrew this adjuster, maybe like half a turn. That makes the sleeve longer, that makes the throttle cable pull on this throttle butterfly in here more and open it more, and that reduces vacuum. You can also do the other thing again. So if you have more vacuum on the left side, you could increase the vacuum here on this side by taking this little adjuster nut loose and then screwing this throttle cable adjuster in. By screwing it in, you're literally making the sleeve of the cable shorter. In return, the throttle cable inside will pull on the throttle butterfly less, will open it less. That will increase the vacuum on this side, and then your needle moves over. So you have two choices. Again, you can open the throttle butterfly by unscrewing the cable adjuster and making the cable pull harder on that throttle butterfly over there, or you can screw the adjuster in, make the cable pull on this throttle butterfly less, and therefore increase the vacuum on this side. So two things that you can choose from, and it depends a little bit on the idle setting. So at idle, at the neutral position of your throttle handle grip, twist grip, you don't want this cable to do any kind of pulling. So you have to have a little bit of some play in the cable. If you are really tight already, if there's barely any play, if there is barely any play in the adjuster, you don't want to unscrew this more. So if you unscrew it more, you're taking up more of the slop, and then eventually you will get to the point where the cable is constantly pulling on the throttle butterfly in here. You need to have a little bit of play while you're in idle. So if you're adjusting your 3000 RPM cable balancing, and you are already really close and you have barely any play in here, then you will have to go to the carburetor that has less vacuum and screw the adjuster in. So you have to make the choice again, you know, making the sleeve longer or making the sleeve shorter. But now let's get the engine warmed up, the fans started, and then we're going to do this here in live on the machine, okay? Oh yeah, and you really only need 2 tools for this. A little bit bigger, longer screwdriver to reach the idle mixture and the idle speed adjuster on the carburetor while everything around there gets pretty warm, and a little flathead screwdriver to take the little plugs out. And then I always use my box here to store the little screws that I'm taking out, and the little gasket too. Alright, let me get this all started up and warmed up and set you up so you guys can see what I'm doing. Alright guys, so engine is warm. I'm trying to have the harmonizer hang here so you guys can see what happens on the gauge. I hope that will work out. Warmed up. Now I'm going to start the harmonizer and put it in gauge mode. That's what we wanted for the first part of the adjustment. It always does the calibrating please wait. So we're going to just wait until it's done, and then it usually goes into balancer mode, but we need it in gauge mode. So you push and hold. 0 is just doing this calibration again. Toggle LED is a LED function. Here's gauge mode. That's what we need. So now I'm going to take the little vacuum port block off out. This is on one side only, remember. One side only. I have a magnetic tray on my tank. You want to make sure you don't put the vacuum hose right against your hot muffler or it might melt. But I think vacuum lines are kind of made for that. There we go. So let's see that we can hang this here somehow so it doesn't touch the hot things. There you go. You can see on the gauge, you can see now it measures inches of mercury, 2-cylinder, and it measures an RPM, but this is not really important. This is measuring the ignitions or the pulses of this 1-cylinder only. That's why it's so low. In reality, we're probably at 620. So now I'm going to use my flathead screwdriver, the bigger one, go at the bottom of the carburetor right there. You can see that here kind of out of center of the frame. Mixture adjustment screw, and I'm going to stick my screwdriver in there, and now I'm just going to start playing around. I'm turning it in and see what happens to the number. The inches of, oh, see, it's almost fall. Now it died. Okay, we're so close to the edge of low RPM dying. My bike idles really low since I haven't done any adjustments. So now I'm turning the screw out, unscrewing. The inches of mercury slowly going up, 4.08, and you're just going very little by very little. And then eventually we'll see that the number goes down again. You really want to find the highest number possible. It's going down, so it's going to fall on its face again. So now I'm going to screw in again until we find the sweet spot. So you will have a falling down sweet spot, and then the other direction also falling down. And you've got to find the spot where the number of inches of mercury is the highest. Right now, 4.11. That's the highest we have seen so far. It fluctuates a little bit, but you just got to play around, turn in a little bit, wait and look what happens. And then if you don't like it or the number gets lower, here we go, this is right there. I'm turning it like 1 degree at a time, and I'm waiting a little bit. It's very fine adjustment. So in, oh, number goes down, maybe do another step in, another step in, and then eventually you see the number fall off again, and then you just go the other direction. Now we're pretty much where the number is fluctuating a lot, but it's 4.14 we have seen. So that's perfect. That's perfect number there. So we're gonna leave this carburetor alone, and we're just gonna do, as you can see, this doesn't take very long. My carburetors were already really close, I guess, because, you know, before my engine refresh here, top end refresh, I had already balanced my carburetors, of course. So now you take this hose off, put the little plug back in. Don't forget the little gasket. There's a fiber gasket in there that needs to be there, or else you have a vacuum leak. And then we're just going to swap over to the other side. It's amazing how slow this idles. Oh, my foot peg rubber is all misaligned. All right. Well, you guys can see this, more or less. So now we're gonna go to 0. 0 calibrating, please wait. All right, we're still in balancer mode, so if you just press the button and 0 it, it doesn't change the mode. So now we're gonna take the little plug out of the vacuum port over here. And you're plugging the same, oh, by the way, the line that you need to use is the red colored one. Only one of the two lines is in use for the gauge mode. So use the red one. There we go. Can you read this? How much light? Better? Better. So 3.81 is the measurement right now. It's not important that this number is the same as on the other side. This is not the purpose of this gauge mode adjustment here. You just want to find the highest number possible. It doesn't matter if the number left and right are the same. It doesn't. So just take your screwdriver again, stick it into the mixture adjustment, idle mixture adjustment screw. That's the recessed one. That's the one down here in the center of the carb. And now you're just going to do the same thing. You're turning in a little bit and you see what the number does. Oh, it's falling on its face. So I'm already on the way out again. We're going out, turning the screw out, and we're increasing in vacuum. A little more. A little more. It's already falling on its face again. So we're pretty much going right back to where we were. 3.7, oh, 3.81. Let's see if we can get it a smidge higher. Oh, 3.84. Yeah, the carburetor was pretty much already dead nuts on in the mixture department. Oh, here we go. 3.87. So this is the highest that we have seen. We're gonna leave it right there and we're not gonna touch it anymore. So now you can take this line off. Now we're gonna go to the balancing mode. So let me show you what we're going to do now. So we're going to push the button and hold it. Go to balancer mode. Now we need 2 vacuum lines. So our mixture adjustment part is over. Now you need both vacuum lines. You need to take both of those little vacuum port block plugs out and then hook one line to the left and one line to the right. And remember, when you first switch it to balancer mode, it has to do the calibration, and during the calibration you cannot have those lines hooked up. They need to be open to the atmosphere. Once it's done and you're in balancer mode, you have to hook it to both sides. Alright guys, the right line on the right port is going to the right side carburetor, and the left line hooked to the left side carburetor, and we are in balancer mode. Oh, hard to see. You see we're a little off center, so the left side carburetor is producing more vacuum than on the other side, but you see there's the smiley face. The smiley face is supposed to indicate that it's acceptable deviation, so to speak. So it's already pretty happy, but Heiko's garage, we're striving for perfection. We may never reach it, but we may reach excellence in the process. So our RPM indication next to it there says 600 RPM, and that's a little on the low side. So 800 maybe would be a little nicer. Look at, we're like balanced. We're literally balanced. We're just really low in the RPM range there. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna use my long screwdriver. Remember, leave the mixture adjustment alone. Don't touch that anymore. The idle speed adjuster, oh, let me do freehand here, hold on. So I can show you what I'm turning, where I'm turning it. So this is the idle speed adjuster right there. And I'm turning this in, righty-tighty, to increase the RPM. You can immediately hear that. Now we're gonna look at our balancing gauge, and we see that the needle has gone over to the right side carburetor. I did the adjustment to the left just now. I increased the RPM. We're at 700 RPM. And the needle went over there because the right side is now producing more vacuum. Now I'm going to do the same thing over here. Right there. And I'm turning it in, righty-tighty. And I'm increasing the RPM even more. So now our needle has come back to the center. Sorry for the sunshine here. Let me move my umbrella right over. There you go, better. So now you can see we're more or less balanced. We're at 760 RPM. It fluctuates a little bit. We're pretty much centered. Absolutely fine, not like this. I increased the idle RPM on both carburetors by about the same amount. There's a little bit of some dancing around here. Let me give it a little bleed. Yeah, you know, it's more feeling than rocket science. It's dancing around the middle. I'm pretty happy with that. I don't think we have any vacuum leaks. We're idling right at 800 RPM. It just dances around a little bit. So I would be perfectly happy, content with this. If your indication shows up like that, just leave it alone. That's all I'm saying. So, so we did 2 steps of our 3-step process already. We did gauge mode to find the perfect mixture with a mixture adjustment screw, then leave it alone, then switch to balancer mode, then hook up both vacuum lines to both carburetors. It's a little, this is bugging me a little bit. Why are we seeing so much dancing here? I wonder if we do have a vacuum leak here somewhere. Screwdriver fell down, great. Where did it go? Where did the screw? Oh, it's stuck in my rear wheel. So while you're doing this and you're revving your engine, don't put anything on your seat. It's just gonna fall down. Alrighty, as you can see here, my magnet tray just holding the little plugs. We're still shifting around the center. I might increase the vacuum on the left side a little bit, just by, no, actually I'm gonna open up the throttle butterfly on the right side a little more. Which in turn reduces the vacuum on the right side, which in turn brings up the RPM a little bit and brings the needle over. It's still dancing. And like I said, these ladies here, those airheads, you know, they can be a little temperamental. I'm gonna close the throttle butterfly a little bit on the left side, so I'm unscrewing just a smidge. That brings the vacuum up on the left side and brings the RPM down a little bit. So now the needle tends to go over to the left more. See that? And you can play with this for hours and try to keep the needle as close in the middle as you can. This is pretty good. I don't like the RPM, it's a little low now. So I'm doing the same thing again. I'm opening just a tiny smidge. I think that's fine. We're gonna leave it like right there. It's dancing between minus reducing the vacuum on the right side by opening the throttle butterfly, turning the idle speed adjuster in. That brings the RPM up a little bit. So it goes from +8 to this is perfect. I think we're gonna leave it right there. So, and then we're getting to the third part of this adjustment, which is the one at 3000 RPM. As you can see, we have an RPM indication on the gauge of the harmonizer. So you just focus on that instead of your needle, and you bring it up to about 3000 RPM. Keep it there a little bit. And you can see that the left part carburetor a little bit more vacuum than the right one. Right? And that's easily fixed. Here, let me change your battery real quick. Alright, you guys get a new battery. We're back at idle, 800 RPM roughly. Our balancing needle is like super dead nuts in the middle. And as you just saw, at 3000 RPM, we have a little bit more vacuum on the left side. Easy to fix. You need a 10mm wrench. You undo the locking nut on your throttle cable adjuster without burning your hands. Cylinders get warm. Sorry, freehand. So you just take that loose, and now we're unscrewing lefty-loosey this adjuster, like let's say a quarter turn, and leave it there. Now we're gonna do the test again. Looking at our gauge, so you guys can see, sorry about that. And as you can see, the left side carburetor is now getting less vacuum, but still more than the right. So we're gonna go down here again, grab it and unscrew another, like an eighth of a turn. And we're gonna test again. And we're so close to the middle, it's kind of silly almost. We're gonna do a 16th of a turn more, unscrewing. So this much. And at 3000 RPM, we're like dead nuts middle. That's what we want. So and now, the trick is, let me put you back on the tripod so I have both hands. The trick now is to tighten the locking nut on this adjuster without changing the setting, and that is really difficult sometimes. So you grab this adjuster, you take your little wrench, and you're tightening your locking nut very gently. Oh my goodness, if I could, without burning my fingers on the cylinder. Ah, hot. And you don't need to pull on this, 190-pound gorilla, just snug so it doesn't come loose by itself. And now to verify, since we wiggled around on it quite a bit, we have to do this again. See, I probably moved the adjuster ever so slightly, but this is really very acceptable. I mean, that is such a small deviation of vacuum. So what I'm going to do is, because we're striving for perfection, can never reach it, but we might reach excellence. I just took it loose, screwed the adjuster in like a smidge, and we're going to do it again. This is probably as close as we will ever get it. Alright, instead of playing around with this more, which you can always do for hours, as long as you have fans running and you get good airflow around your cylinders, you can play with this for hours. Warm it up properly, do the mixture adjustment with the gauge mode on both sides individually, use the red port on the Harmonizer, then switch to balancer mode, and then you are balancing the carburetors to each other in idle. Keep your idle RPM in mind, so whenever you make an adjustment in balancer mode, in idle, you're just adjusting the idle speed adjusting screw. That's the knurled one. If you screw it in, you're opening the throttle, so to speak, the throttle butterfly. That reduces vacuum but increases the RPM. If you unscrew the idle adjustments or speed adjustment, idle speed adjuster, my goodness, you unscrew it, you're closing the throttle. That increases vacuum but also decreases the RPM. So you kind of have to play the game. Which side do I increase or which side do I decrease? And at the same time keeping the idle RPM in mind. And then grabbing your throttle, 3000 RPM, watch the needle. Where's the needle going? And on the side that you are going, you can either opening the throttle by unscrewing the adjuster, making the sleeve longer, make the cable pull on the throttle more. That decreases the vacuum, but yeah, it decreases the vacuum on that side where you do that adjustment. But if you barely have any play in the sleeve, then you might want to go onto the other side and screw the adjuster in. So this is a little bit of a balancing act. Anyways, I don't want to confuse you any more than I already did. So let's close this up. Alrighty guys, I go all sweaty. It's pretty hot out here. Fans are still running. I'm just gonna let it cool down slowly. As you can see, it's not rocket science. It's really just playing with it. Set it up nicely so you can play with this for half an hour, and just understand what each little tiny adjustment does. Mixture adjustment, you're looking for the highest number, and you're not comparing to the other side. The number itself really doesn't matter as long as you get the highest achievable on that particular carburetor. And then in the balancing mode, you are comparing the vacuum with each other. So wherever the needle moves is the side where you have more vacuum. And you can correct that by either opening the throttle on that side or closing the throttle on the other side. I'm saying throttle, it's not technically correct on a constant velocity carburetor. The throttle is the slide in the middle of the carburetor that's controlled by a big diaphragm. So you have no direct connection with your throttle hand to it. It's actually done by a big diaphragm and vacuum. What you are moving is the throttle butterfly, which is a valve, air valve, so to speak. Anyways, needle moves to one side. That's the side where there is more vacuum present, and you can change that by opening the throttle on that side or closing the throttle on the other side to bring the needle over. And then the third step is the balancing of the throttle cable. And again, you can either increase the tension on one side or decrease the tension on the other side to move the needle over. Play with it, take your time, maybe pick a cool day so you're not like all sweaty like I am right now. And set up the fans, set it up. Then still ride your bike to warm it up. You want proper, you know, a good operation temperature of the engine and the oil and all that stuff. And then once in a while in between, just open the throttle a little bit, blow out the, you know, the cobwebs, and then keep going. So give the engine a little bit of some breathing room, and make sure you have your timing absolutely set and your valves are perfectly set. As you can hear, my bike is, I really, the top end refresh that I didn't just do a reseal, but I have one new intake valve. I have actually a new valve guide in one of the cylinder heads because the guide had come loose inside the head. Never seen that before. Lapped in the valves, everything is clean, no carbon on the pistons or the cylinder head, and that really quiet down this engine. It's unbelievable. Oh yeah, if you ever take your rocker shaft assembly off, the little pads that right on top of the valve that push the valve, look at those pads. If they are worn or if they are pitted, that makes a lot of noise too, and eventually it will wear out your valve too. That's it, guys. This is Harmonizer balancing. The technique applies to other vacuum gauge type balancers as well. If you have maybe a Motion Pro or there's some other brands of balancers out there, and you can do the same thing. Gauge mode is highest vacuum on one carburetor, and you can do that with any other gauge too. This one particular, because it measures it and it has sensors, and it kind of stabilizes the situation. You don't have super strong fluctuations in the indication. That makes it really easy to find the sweet spot. And then the balancing is just like with any other vacuum type balancer. Of course, there are other methods to balance your carburetors, which I might show in a future video, which is like the ground out method. You put a little extensions on your spark plugs. You plug the spark plug caps onto the extensions, and the extensions allow you to use a screwdriver and ground out one side spark plug to the cylinder so it doesn't produce a spark. So you're pretty much killing the engine on one side or the other, and then you are listening to the engine response. So when you're grounding out one side, does that sound the same as the grounding out on the other side? But that is the method that I would use on the side of the road. If I had something come loose or something came apart or something is just not running right, I get my little extensions out that you can buy somewhere. I might show this in a future video. It's also pretty easy as long as you understand what you need to do to achieve a certain reaction of the engine. Anyways guys, that's it for now. If you like the Harmonizer balancing video revision 2, give me a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel. See you here in the next one. Take care. Bye.